Move, old woman. You don't fight back. You get buried under what you can't protect. Darius Kane's voice cut through the air as his boot crushed a basket of Martha Ellison's crops, the pulp grinding into the soil like it meant nothing. Around him, 50 armed men spread across her land, trampling rows her family had planted for generations, their laughter sharp and careless. A rifle barrel nudged her shoulder. Not hard, just enough to remind her she was outnumbered. Martha didn't flinch. Her sleeves were rolled to her forearms, hands still, eyes steady. Not on Darius, but on everything else. The distance between men, the gaps in their formation, the blind spots they didn't know they had. "You've got 1 minute," he said, shoving forged papers toward her face. She said nothing, because every man there thought they were cornering a helpless old farmer. And none of them understood they were already standing exactly where she needed them. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Martha Ellison's farm as she moved between rows of corn, her weathered hands checking the stalks with practiced care. At 68, she knew every inch of this Georgia soil that had been in her family for generations. The quiet was familiar, broken only by chirping crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. That's when she heard it. The distant rumble of engines shattered the peace she'd come to treasure. Martha straightened her back slowly, years of experience telling her something wasn't right. No one visited at this hour, and certainly not with multiple vehicles. Through the gaps in the cornfield, she caught glimpses of dust clouds rising from her access road. 4 trucks, no, 5, all moving fast and purposeful. Her heart quickened, but her face remained calm. These weren't friendly visitors stopping by for sweet tea. The vehicles burst through her gate without slowing, tires throwing gravel as they fanned out around her farmhouse. They were big trucks, expensive ones, with tinted windows and chrome that gleamed aggressively in the sun. The doors flew open before the engines died, and men poured out like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Martha counted 20 at first glance, then more emerged. All of them armed, pistols on hips, rifles in hands. They moved with coordination, spreading out to surround her property. These weren't random thugs. This was organized. A man stepped forward from the lead vehicle. He wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the dusty farmyard, but his stance showed he was used to commanding attention. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached Martha, holding up a folder filled with papers. "Mrs. Ellison," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'm Darius Kane. I believe you received our notices about the property transfer." Martha stood her ground, her worn work boots planted firmly in the soil she'd tended for decades. "I received nothing legitimate," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "This land has been in my family since Reconstruction. We have all the proper documentation." Kane's smile tightened. "I have documents here showing otherwise. This land has been foreclosed and legally transferred to my development company." He held up the papers, letting them catch the sunlight. "I'm afraid you'll need to vacate immediately." "Those papers are false," Martha said, not bothering to look at them. "I have no debt, no liens, no legal reason to leave my property." The men around Kane shifted restlessly, hands tightening on weapons. One spat on the ground. Another kicked over a nearby tool cart, sending Martha's gardening implements scattering across the dirt. "Mrs. Ellison," Kane's voice took on an edge of steel, "I don't think you understand your situation. This is happening whether you like it or not." My men will help you pack." More of the gang members began moving, their boots crushing Martha's vegetable garden as they spread out. Two of them headed for her barn, kicking in the door with a splintering crack that made her flinch inside, though she kept her face neutral. "Get off my land," Martha said, each word precise and firm. Cain laughed, and his men joined in. The sound echoed wrong across her peaceful fields. "Or what, old woman? You'll call the sheriff? They know better than to interfere with my business." The destruction began in earnest then. Men upended her rain barrels, kicked down her fence posts, and scattered her chickens with sharp shouts and cruel laughter. Inside the barn, she could hear things breaking, tools being thrown, equipment being smashed. Martha watched it all, her hands closed into tight fists at her sides. These men thought they saw everything about her. An elderly black woman, alone on a farm, an easy target. They saw what they wanted to see. A burly man with tattoos covering his arms approached her, getting too close. His breath stank of cigarettes as he leaned in. "Better start packing, Grandma, before things get really messy." When Martha didn't move, the man grabbed her shoulder and shoved her hard. She hit the ground, dust coating her work clothes. The impact sent pain through her hip, but she didn't cry out. Around her, several men laughed. "Just an old woman," one called out. "Ain't so tough now." Through the cloud of dust, Martha saw the first flames leap up at the edge of her cornfield. Someone had brought gasoline. The fire spread quickly in the dry afternoon heat, eating into the crops she'd tended so carefully. Smoke began to rise into the Georgia sky, carrying with it the smell of burning memories. The men around her continued their destruction, confident in their power, certain of their victory. They saw an old woman in the dirt, nothing more. They didn't notice how she took in every detail, counting weapons, noting positions, marking faces. They didn't see her eyes track their movements with military precision, or how her fingers pressed against the soil, not in defeat, but in preparation. Cain stood watching it all, satisfaction clear on his face, as more fires were set, and the sound of breaking glass came from the direction of her greenhouse. His men had made a fatal mistake in their certainty. They thought they were taking land from a helpless widow. They were wrong. The acrid smoke from burning crops filled the air as Martha pushed herself up from the dusty ground. Her weathered hands brushed dirt from her work clothes, each movement deliberate and controlled. Around her, chaos reigned as Darius Cain's men tore through her property like locusts. "Search every building," Cain barked from his position near the trucks. "I want everything of value catalogued. Anything else, break it." The sound of splintering wood echoed from the barn as two men used crowbars to pry apart the doorframe. Others kicked down the remaining fence posts along the northern pasture, sending her cattle into a panic. The animals bolted, scattering in all directions as men whooped and fired shots into the air. Martha watched it all with unsettling composure. Her dark eyes tracked each man's movement, noting weapons, counting ammunition clips, marking the ones who seemed most trigger-happy. When a window shattered in her greenhouse, she didn't flinch, just noted the baseball bat in the perpetrator's hands and the pistol tucked in his waistband. "Mrs. Ellison," Cain called out, his polished shoes leaving prints in her vegetable garden as he approached. "This could all be much easier. Just sign the transfer papers, take a generous relocation payment, and walk away with dignity." "There is no dignity in stealing," Martha replied, her voice steady despite the destruction surrounding them. "This land isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Cain's carefully maintained smile flickered. Look around you, old woman. You're alone. No one's coming to help. The police won't intervene. The courts won't save you. I own this county. A crash from inside her house drew Martha's attention. Through the window, she could see men ransacking her living room, tipping over furniture and pulling books from shelves. One of them found a framed photo of her late husband and threw it against the wall. "You have no idea what you're doing," Martha said quietly, almost to herself. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Kane sneered. He gestured to a hulking man nearby. "Jackson, help Mrs. Ellison understand her situation better." The man, Jackson, grabbed Martha's arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh as he tried to drag her toward one of the trucks. She planted her feet, refusing to be moved despite his size advantage. His face reddened with effort and frustration. "Move it, Grandma," he growled, yanking harder. Martha turned her head slowly, meeting Kane's gaze. Her eyes held none of the fear he expected to see. Instead, there was something else, something cold and evaluating that made him shift uncomfortably, despite himself. "This is your last warning," she said clearly, each word precise and measured. "Take your men and leave my property. Now!" Laughter erupted from the gathered thugs. Jackson's grip tightened painfully on her arm as he guffawed. "Or what? You'll hit us with your walking stick?" Kane spread his arms wide, taking in the scene of destruction around them. "Mrs. Ellison, I think you're confused about who's giving warnings here. My men are armed. They're trained. You're just a stubborn old woman who doesn't know when she's beaten." More windows shattered as men systematically worked their way through her house. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. They were preparing to burn more than just the crops. Martha's chicken coop collapsed under repeated kicks, sending panicked birds fluttering in all directions. "Look at your little farm falling apart," Kane taunted. "How long did your family work this land? 3 generations? 4? All that history, gone because you're too proud to accept reality. Jackson, put her in the truck. We'll let her watch it burn." But when Jackson pulled again, Martha moved with the motion, using his own force to break his grip. She stepped back, rubbing her arm where his fingers had left red marks. Her expression remained unnervingly calm. "I won't warn you again," she said simply. Kane's amusement turned to irritation. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by someone who should be powerless against him. "Enough games. Either you leave conscious or you leave unconscious. Your choice." Martha's eyes swept the scene one final time. 52 men, by her count. Mostly pistols, some rifles, all moving with the cocky carelessness of those who thought they'd already won. They'd spread out across her property, not bothering to maintain tactical positions or watch their surroundings. Without another word, she turned and walked toward her farmhouse. Her pace was unhurried, her back straight despite the chaos around her. Men jeered and catcalled as she climbed the porch steps. "Running to hide?" one called out. "Gonna cry in your bedroom, old lady?" "Let her go," Kane said, lighting an expensive cigar. "Let her pack a bag. When she comes back out, we'll help her leave, one way or another." Martha paused at her front door, her hand resting on the worn wooden frame. Inside, she could hear more destruction as men rampaged through her home, but they hadn't found everything. They hadn't even thought to look. The screen door creaked as she pulled it open. With the same deliberate calm she'd shown throughout the confrontation, Martha stepped inside and quietly shut the door behind her. Through the window, she could see Kane directing his men to continue the destruction. confident in his victory. None of them noticed how she'd been marking distances in her head. None of them realized she'd been calculating angles and cataloging cover positions. They saw an old woman retreating in defeat. Nothing more. Inside the farmhouse, Martha stepped over the wreckage of her overturned furniture, moving with fluid grace that belied her age. The transformation was instant. Gone was the peaceful farmer, replaced by someone who moved like a predator. Her footsteps were silent, despite the broken glass crunching underfoot. She crossed to the living room's far corner, where a faded rug lay bunched against the wall. Kneeling, she pulled it aside to reveal wooden floorboards that looked identical to all the others. But Martha's fingers found an invisible seam, pressing just so. A hidden panel popped loose with a soft click. The compartment beneath was deep and dry, lined with protective fabric. Martha reached in, her hands finding familiar shapes in the darkness. First came a long, padded case. Then several boxes of ammunition, a cleaning kit, extra magazines. Each item was meticulously maintained despite years of storage. The sound of breaking windows and shouting continued outside, but it seemed distant now as Martha opened the case. Inside lay a disassembled Macmillan TAC 338 sniper rifle, each piece nestled in custom-cut foam. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over as she began assembly. Bolt group, receiver, barrel, stock. Each component clicked into place with practiced precision. Through the window, she could hear Kane giving more orders. "Check the upstairs. Find anything valuable before we torch it." Heavy boots thundered up her stairs as Martha worked, her movements unhurried but efficient. She loaded the magazine with 338 Lapua Magnum rounds, each bullet carefully seated. "Nothing up here but old lady stuff," a voice called down. "Want us to trash it?" "Burn it all," Kane replied. "Let's wrap this up." Martha finished mounting the scope, adjusting it with tiny, precise movements. The rifle was an extension of her body, as familiar as her own hands. She'd hoped to never need it again, but she'd never stopped maintaining it. Some habits couldn't be broken. Some skills shouldn't be forgotten. The thermal scope powered on silently as she moved to the stairwell. Two men were coming down, laughing as they knocked photos off the walls. They passed right by her hiding spot in the shadows, never looking back. Martha waited until they were gone before ascending to the second floor. Her bedroom window offered the best vantage point. The afternoon sun was behind her now, eliminating glare. Wind was minimal. Humidity and temperature would barely affect the shots at these ranges. Martha settled into position, her breathing automatically slowing to the measured rhythm she'd learned decades ago. Through the scope, she could see the entire front yard. Kane's men had grown sloppy, clustering together as they vandalized her property. No one was watching the house. No one maintained proper security. They'd assumed she was helpless, and that assumption would cost them. Martha selected her first target, a man holding a gas can, preparing to douse her barn. The suppressed rifle made only a soft thump as she squeezed the trigger. The man dropped instantly, a clean shot through the chest. The gas can clattered away, spilling across the dirt. For 2 long seconds, no one reacted. Then someone noticed the fallen man and shouted. As heads turned to look, Martha's second shot found another target. A third fell before anyone realized they were under fire. Each shot was precise, controlled, lethal. Chaos erupted below. Men scrambled for cover, but they'd left themselves exposed. Years of training took over as Martha acquired targets through her scope. Time seemed to slow. She noted wind indicators in the waving grass calculated distances automatically, adjusted for minute factors that could affect each shot. "Sniper!" someone screamed. "Where's it coming from? Get down! Get to the trucks!" Another shot. Another target eliminated. Martha's expression remained neutral, almost detached. This wasn't personal. This was mathematics and physics. Breath control. Trigger discipline. The same skills she'd used in a dozen countries under a dozen different mission parameters. Kane was shouting orders, trying to rally his men. "Spread out! Find the shooter!" She must have help. One person couldn't. Two more shots in rapid succession dropped men trying to flank the house. Panic spread through the remaining gang members. Some broke for their vehicles. Others fired blindly at the house, their shots going wide. None of them had expected this level of resistance. None of them had training for this situation. Martha ejected the empty magazine, smoothly inserting a fresh one. The motion was automatic, requiring no conscious thought. Through her scope, she watched Kane diving behind a truck, shouting into a phone, calling for reinforcements, most likely. She noted his position but didn't take the shot. Not yet. Let him see what he'd walked into first. More men fell as they tried to organize a response. Each shot was carefully selected for maximum psychological impact. Leaders, radio operators, anyone trying to coordinate a defense. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. No one was beyond reach. At the second-floor window, Martha adjusted her position slightly. The rifle settled against her shoulder, its weight comforting and familiar. Her breathing remained steady, her hands stable. Through the scope, she picked out her next target with the same calm precision she'd once used to tend her gardens. The chaos below continued to spread, but Martha remained still, waiting. Let them run. Let them panic. She had time. She had ammunition. And most importantly, she had the high ground and the tactical advantage they'd given her through their own arrogance. Through her scope, Martha watched the remaining gang members scatter like leaves in a storm. Their coordinated attack had devolved into chaos. Some crawled behind vehicles, while others sprinted between cover, desperate to avoid her precise shots. Each time someone tried to organize a counterattack, another suppressed round would find its mark. "East side! Everyone to the east side!" one of Kane's lieutenants shouted, trying to rally the men. His voice cut off abruptly as Martha's bullet struck him in the chest. The message was clear. Leadership would not be tolerated. Martha ejected another empty magazine, her movements smooth and practiced. The familiar sound of metal on metal brought back memories she'd buried decades ago. Desert nights in unnamed countries. Mountain passes where one shot could change the course of conflicts. Missions that never officially existed. She pushed the memories aside, focusing on the present threat. Through her scope, she counted remaining targets, assessing priorities. Anyone holding a weapon became an immediate concern. Those attempting to coordinate resistance were secondary targets. The rest could wait. Kane had taken cover behind a pickup truck, shouting into his phone. "I don't care what it costs. Get everyone here now." This was supposed to be a simple land grab, but we've got a serious problem. His voice carried across the yard, tight with rage and disbelief. Martha shifted position slightly, compensating for a subtle change in the wind. A man with a rifle tried to set up a firing position behind her overturned tractor. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Another attempted to reach him and went down with a leg wound. She was being selective now, disabling rather than killing, but ensuring they knew every movement could bring consequences. "She's picking us apart," someone yelled. "We need to pull back." Kane's response was immediate and harsh. "Nobody leaves! Hold your positions!" But his authority was crumbling. Men began breaking for their vehicles, no longer responding to his commands. Martha allowed some to retreat, focusing her fire on those who remained aggressive. Each shot was calculated for maximum psychological impact, precise enough to demonstrate skill, but spaced to create constant tension. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her land as the battle shifted. Martha noted how the gang's body language had changed. Their initial swagger had vanished, replaced by hunched shoulders and nervous glances. They'd expected to intimidate an elderly woman. Instead, they'd found themselves outmatched by someone who understood violence on a professional level. A flash of movement caught her attention. 3 men were attempting to circle behind the house, using her shed for cover. Martha switched positions smoothly, moving to a different window. The first man went down clutching his knee. The second took a round through his shooting hand. The third simply ran, abandoning his weapon. More memories surfaced as she worked. Training exercises in Georgia's humidity, so similar to today's weather. Instructors drilling the fundamentals of patience and shot selection. The weight of responsibility that came with exceptional skill. She'd spent years trying to forget those lessons, but they'd never truly left her. Kane was still trying to salvage the situation. "Find out where she's shooting from. She can't cover every angle." But Martha had positioned herself perfectly. Years of tactical experience had taught her how to control a battlefield. Each window offered multiple firing lanes. Every piece of cover the gang might use had been noted and accounted for long before they arrived. This was her land. She knew every inch of it. The gang's numbers had been cut nearly in half. Those remaining were pinned down, unable to advance or effectively return fire. Their shots, when they came, were wild and desperate. Martha could hear arguments breaking out among them, discipline crumbling under sustained pressure. It was time to press her advantage. She set the rifle aside and moved downstairs, her footsteps silent from years of practice. The front door opened smoothly, and Martha stepped onto her porch. She stood straight, her posture military perfect, eyes scanning the scattered intruders with cold precision. "You have 10 minutes to clear my property," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Anyone still here after that will be considered a lethal threat." The effect was immediate. Several men broke cover and ran for their vehicles, no longer caring about Kane's orders. Others looked to their leader, uncertain. Martha remained motionless, projecting absolute confidence. She'd worn this same expression during hostage negotiations in places where mistakes meant death. Kane stayed behind his truck, studying her with newly cautious eyes. The polished businessman facade had cracked, revealing something darker underneath. He was reassessing, recalculating, finally recognizing the steel core beneath Martha's peaceful exterior. "Fall back," he finally ordered. "Tactical retreat. Now!" Engines roared to life as vehicles began pulling away. Martha watched them go, noting license plates, identifying marks, faces. Her memory had been trained to retain such details, another skill that hadn't faded with time. She remained on the porch until the last truck disappeared in a cloud of dust. Only Kane lingered, still watching from behind his dented pickup. His expression had shifted from arrogant dismissal to focused intensity. Martha met his gaze steadily, letting him see what he'd overlooked before, the calculating eyes of someone intimately familiar with violence, someone who understood not just how to fight, but how to win. The message was clear. He hadn't just failed to intimidate an old woman. He'd unknowingly engaged a professional. and that mistake had cost him dearly. The setting sun painted long shadows across Martha's fields as Darius Kane's remaining forces regrouped at the property line. Through her scope, she watched them cluster around their vehicles, anger and humiliation evident in their postures. Kane paced behind his truck, barking into his phone while gesturing at maps spread across the hood. Martha tracked their movements methodically, noting positions and numbers. Her earlier precision had cut their force nearly in half, but she knew this wasn't over. Kane's body language screamed determination rather than defeat. He was planning something bigger. Raised voices carried across the cooling evening air. "You said this would be easy," one of the men shouted at Kane. "Just scare off some old lady, you said. Now we've got dead and wounded." Kane spun toward the complainer, his polished exterior cracking. "Shut your mouth. This land is worth more than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. He jabbed his finger at a spot on the map. "Right here, under this worthless farm, there's an aquifer that could supply water to half the state. Millions in contracts, pipeline deals, water rights, all of it sitting under her stupid corn." Martha's grip tightened on her rifle. So that was it. Not just intimidation or land grabbing, but something much larger. She'd wondered why they'd targeted her specifically. Why such force for a small farm? The water explained everything. Kane's voice carried again as he rallied his men. "I've got 30 more guys coming in from Atlanta. Heavy weapons, proper gear. We're going to lock this place down tight. No one in or out. She's good, but she can't watch every angle forever." Through her scope, Martha watched vehicles begin moving, spreading out to block the access roads. More trucks arrived, carrying fresh fighters and equipment. They were establishing a proper siege perimeter, learning from their earlier mistakes. These weren't just thugs anymore. They were becoming an organized force. She moved away from the window, mind shifting into tactical assessment. The farm covered nearly 80 acres, most of it cultivated fields with scattered structures. Barn, silos, equipment sheds. Good firing positions, but also vulnerable to being surrounded. The house itself was solid, but not fortified. She needed to think bigger. In her living room, Martha rolled out old survey maps across the coffee table. Her fingers traced irrigation lines, drainage ditches, and the subtle elevation changes she knew by heart. Each feature was a potential asset or liability. The North Field's trenches could provide covered movement. The western tree line offered natural concealment. The old grain silos commanded views of multiple approaches. She moved to the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, assessing her resources. Beyond the sniper rifle, she had several other weapons cached away, remnants of her past life. An M4 carbine, perfect for closer work. A compact MP5 submachine gun for tight spaces. Magazines, ammunition, even a few carefully preserved grenades. Not an arsenal, but enough for someone who knew how to use them. More importantly, she had knowledge. Decades of experience in asymmetrical warfare, in turning terrain against superior numbers. She'd trained for exactly this, being outnumbered, surrounded, but refusing to be defeated. The farm itself would become her weapon. Martha began gathering supplies, moving with practiced efficiency. Ammunition was distributed to strategic caches around the property. Medical supplies were positioned for quick access. She filled canteens and checked radio frequencies, falling easily into old routines. The precise movements felt familiar, like speaking a language she'd tried to forget. In the barn, she quickly rigged simple early warning systems, tripwires connected to noisemakers, pressure plates that would signal movement. Not sophisticated, but effective. They would tell her where they were coming from, force them to move slowly and cautiously. Time and patience were her allies now. The house itself needed preparation. Martha moved furniture to create firing lanes, noting which windows offered the best coverage. She blocked some access points, left others seemingly vulnerable as traps. Every entrance became a potential ambush point. Every room a possible stronghold. Night was falling rapidly now, bringing deeper shadows and cooler air. Through her night vision scope, Martha watched Kane's reinforcements continue to arrive. They were setting up proper guard posts, establishing communications, laying the groundwork for a sustained operation. Their numbers had swelled past 60, with more still coming. She noted their equipment. Better weapons now, tactical gear, even a few pairs of night vision goggles. They were adapting, becoming more professional. But professionalism cut both ways. It made them more dangerous, but also more predictable. They would follow standard tactics, expected procedures. She could use that. The darkness brought memories of other nights, other battles. Mountains in Afghanistan, where every shadow held threat or opportunity. Dense jungle operations where patience meant survival. Urban combat, where knowing the terrain meant everything. Different landscapes, but the same principles. Control the ground, control the fight. Moving silently through her house, Martha positioned herself at her primary observation point. The rifle felt natural in her hands, its weight familiar and reassuring. Through the scope, she watched Kane directing his men, establishing patrol patterns. He'd learned from the afternoon's losses, was being more cautious now. But caution wouldn't save them. They still didn't truly understand what they were facing. They saw the farm as an objective to be taken. She saw it as a battlefield already shaped to her advantage. Every fence line, every ditch, every building had been arranged over years of careful work. This wasn't just her home. It was her fortress. As full darkness settled over the land, Martha loaded a fresh magazine into her rifle. The smooth mechanical sound echoed softly in the quiet room. Outside, Kane's men moved through the shadows, confident in their numbers and equipment. They thought they had her trapped. "This is my field," Martha whispered, settling into position. "You'll learn what that means." The farm settled into an uneasy quiet as darkness claimed the land. Clouds drifted across the moon, casting shifting shadows over the fields. Martha moved like a phantom through her property, each step calculated and silent. Years of working this soil had taught her every dip, every rise, every hidden path between the rows of corn. Through her night vision scope, she watched Kane's men establish their positions. Their inexperience showed in how they clustered near light sources, ruining their night vision. They stayed close to the vehicles, afraid of the darkness beyond. Amateur mistakes that would cost them dearly. Martha's mind drifted back to another night, 15 years ago in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Her team had tracked a high-value target for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment. She remembered the weight of patience, the absolute control required to remain motionless for hours. That same focus filled her now as she studied the gang's patrol patterns. 2 men broke away from the main group, moving toward the northern fence line. They carried rifles awkwardly, sweeping their flashlight beams in jerky movements. Martha tracked them through her scope, noting their separation from support, their poor tactical awareness. Perfect targets. She moved through the corn rows without disturbing a single stalk, her boots finding solid ground, through decades of muscle memory. The flashlight beams grew closer, accompanied by nervous whispers. "This is messed up, man," one of them muttered. "We should have never come here." "Shut up," his partner hissed. "Just keep looking. She's got to be out here somewhere." Martha allowed herself a small, grim smile. She was indeed out here, but not where they expected. While they focused on ground level, she'd used the irrigation trenches to circle behind them. Now she rose silently, rifle ready. 2 suppressed shots, less than a second apart. Both men dropped without a sound, their flashlights casting crazy patterns as they fell. Martha was moving before they hit the ground, disappearing back into the darkness. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just like her training taught her. The memory hit her with sudden clarity. Her first sniper instructor's voice, harsh but precise. "You're not just shooting targets, you're solving problems. Every shot is a math equation written in flesh and bone." She'd excelled at those equations, became one of the best. Until that final mission, when following orders, meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Shouts erupted from the eastern perimeter. Someone had found the bodies. Flashlight beams crisscrossed frantically, searching for threats that had already vanished. A burst of automatic fire split the night, spraying wildly into the corn. Martha shook her head at their panic. Wasting ammunition, revealing positions, destroying their own night vision. She moved to her next target, the grain silos. 2 men had set up an observation post on the catwalk, thinking the elevation gave them advantage. They didn't realize the metal structure carried sound. Martha could hear their boots shifting nervously above as she climbed the maintenance ladder on the shadow side. Another burst of gunfire echoed from somewhere in the fields, followed by cursing. Kane's voice carried across the property. "Hold your fire, you idiots! Save your ammo!" The men on the silo were distracted by the commotion. Martha crested the catwalk behind them, silent as a shadow. The knife was quicker than the rifle this time. More intimate, but just as efficient. She caught the first man before he could cry out, eased his body down quietly. The second turned at the last moment, eyes widening in recognition before the blade found him. More memories surfaced. Other close encounters. Other nights when steel was better than lead. The weight of necessary violence. The cost of survival. She'd buried those memories deep beneath years of peaceful farming, but they rose now like old friends, familiar and deadly. Martha used the silo's height to survey the battlefield. Kane had pulled his men back, consolidating around the vehicles. They'd set up floodlights, creating a harsh circle of artificial day. But the lights just made the surrounding darkness deeper, more threatening. They were ceding the night to her, retreating to their own fear. She keyed her night vision, scanning methodically. 23 men still visible, plus Kane. Several nursing wounds from her earlier strikes. Their body language showed growing tension, jumping at shadows, weapons held too tight. The cool professionalism of earlier was cracking. A sudden explosion rocked the night. One of her prepared surprises. She'd rigged an old fuel tank with simple explosives, waited until they clustered 3 vehicles near it. The fireball lit up the sky, destroying their night vision and sending shrapnel in all directions. Chaos erupted immediately. "We're under attack!" multiple voices shouted in panic. More wild firing into the darkness, more wasted ammunition. They were unraveling, their tactical discipline shattered by an enemy they couldn't see or fight. Martha was already moving, using the confusion to her advantage. She slipped through the shadows of the equipment shed, past the burning vehicles. Her boots made no sound on the soft earth, as she disappeared into the tall corn. Behind her, scattered gunfire continued to echo across the farm, punctuated by shouts and curses. She allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. The night was still young, and she had many more equations to solve. They thought numbers and weapons would give them victory. But she'd learned long ago that true strength lay in patience, in knowing the land, in becoming one with the darkness. This was her field, and she would teach them that lesson one shot at a time. Martha slipped through the back door of her farmhouse, her movements silent, despite hours of continuous action. The pre-dawn darkness still cloaked the property, but hints of gray touched the eastern horizon. Her boots left muddy prints on the wooden floor, evidence of her night's work dealing with Cain's men. A floorboard creaked behind her. Martha spun, rifle raised, fingers steady on the trigger. A teenage boy stood frozen in her kitchen, hands raised, eyes wide with fear and determination. "Don't shoot," he whispered. "I'm Caleb, from the Turner farm next door." Martha kept the rifle aimed. "You picked a bad night for a visit, boy." "I saw what they did to your property." Caleb's voice shook slightly, but he stood his ground. "Been watching since they showed up. Saw the fires, heard the shooting, figured you could use help." Martha lowered her weapon slowly, studying him. Young, maybe 16, with dark hair and work-worn hands that marked him as a farmer's kid. She recognized him now. Bob Turner's grandson, who spent summers helping on the neighboring property. "You need to leave," Martha said firmly. "This isn't your fight. Those men killed 3 of our cattle when they set up their blockade," Caleb replied. "They threatened my grandpa when he tried to call the sheriff. It became my fight when they brought their violence to our community." Martha moved to her kitchen window, checking sight lines while considering the boy's words. The gang's floodlights still blazed in the distance, but their positioning had changed. They were adapting, learning from their losses. "You'll just get in my way," she said, "or get yourself killed." "I know every inch of this land," Caleb insisted. "Been exploring these farms since I could walk. All the hidden paths, the old creek beds, places even you might not know about. I can help with reconnaissance, maybe run messages if needed." Martha turned back to study him more carefully. The boy's stance showed no sign of backing down. His jaw was set with the same stubborn determination she'd seen in young soldiers, the ones who survived. "This isn't a game," she warned. "These men are killers. They won't hesitate to shoot a teenager." "I understand the risk." Caleb's voice steadied. "But someone has to stand up to them. You're doing it." "Let me help." Martha sighed, remembering another young face from decades ago, a girl who'd joined the military believing in justice, believing she could make a difference. Before the compromises, before the missions that stained her soul. "First sign of serious trouble, you run," she said finally. "No arguing, no heroics. Clear?" Caleb nodded eagerly. "Crystal clear, ma'am. And don't call me ma'am. It's Martha." She moved to her kitchen table, unfolding a worn property map. "Show me these paths you mentioned." Caleb leaned over the map, pointing out details with surprising precision. "There's an old drainage tunnel here, runs under the north field. Probably too small for grown men, but I can fit through it. And this gully behind the orchard looks shallow, but there's a deep section perfect for moving unseen." Martha nodded, noting how the boy's knowledge filled gaps in her own tactical planning. The tunnel especially could prove valuable for circumventing Cain's blockade. "What else have you observed about their positions?" she asked. "They're running 3-man patrols, but getting sloppy about timing," Caleb reported. "Gap of almost 12 minutes between rotations on the east side. And their radio discipline is awful. I can hear half their communications from the tree line. Martha raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. The boy had a natural eye for tactical details. "You've been paying attention." "My grandpa taught me to notice everything on a farm," Caleb said. "Says you never know what small detail might save your crop or your life." "Smart man, your grandpa." Martha checked her ammunition, redistributing magazines between pockets. "But this is different from farm work. These men will shoot to kill." "I know." Caleb's voice softened. "I saw what they did to Mr. Johnson's place last month. Burned him out when he wouldn't sell. He was my grandpa's friend for 40 years. Martha saw the pain in his eyes, recognized the seed of justified anger. The same anger that had driven her through years of military service, through missions that tested her humanity. The first rays of dawn began filtering through the kitchen windows. Martha checked her watch. Less than an hour until full light. Kane would likely launch another push once he had better visibility. "All right," she said, reaching a decision. "I need eyes on their southern position. Think you can get close enough to count vehicles and men without being seen?" Caleb's face lit up with purpose. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, Martha. There's a drainage ditch that runs parallel to the fence line. Perfect cover for observation. Take these." Martha handed him a pair of binoculars and a small radio. "Channel 3, call sign Scout. Keep transmissions short. If anything feels wrong, you pull back immediately." "What's your call sign?" Caleb asked, handling the equipment with careful respect. "Farmer," Martha replied with a hint of dark humor. "Keep it simple." They moved to the back door together. The eastern sky was brightening steadily now, promising another hot Georgia day. Martha watched Caleb check his radio, adjust the binoculars strap with steady hands. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Truth this time." Caleb met her eyes. "Because my grandpa always said good people can't just watch bad things happen. We have to stand up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Martha felt something shift inside her. A recognition of shared values, of courage untainted by years of compromise. Perhaps having this boy's help wasn't just about tactical advantage. The sun's first direct rays touched the farmhouse roof as they prepared to move out. Martha checked her rifle one final time, watching Caleb settle the radio's earpiece. Morning sunlight swept across Martha's farm, illuminating the night's devastation. Scorched patches of earth marked where her crops had burned. Broken fences and scattered equipment littered the property. The peaceful Georgia landscape she'd woken to yesterday was now a scarred battlefield. From her position near the storage shed, Martha watched Kane's men regrouping. They moved with renewed purpose, no longer the disorganized rabble from last night. Through her scope, she spotted them unloading new equipment from freshly arrived trucks. "Scout to farmer," Caleb's voice crackled through her radio. "They're setting up something on the ridge." Martha shifted her aim, focusing on the elevated position. Her jaw tightened as she recognized the gear. "Drones," she muttered into her radio. "At least 3 units. Get back to cover immediately." The first drone lifted off moments later, its small form buzzing against the morning sky. 2 more followed, spreading out in a search pattern over the property. Martha cursed under her breath. The machines would make movement much more difficult, especially in daylight. "All units, commence Operation Burnout," Kane's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Light them up." Multiple fires ignited simultaneously around the property's perimeter. Unlike the random destruction from yesterday, these blazes were controlled and strategic. designed to force Martha toward the center of her land. Thick smoke began rolling across the fields. Through her scope, Martha watched Cain directing his men with precise gestures. He'd adapted quickly, learning from his earlier losses. This was no longer just intimidation. It was siege warfare. A woman's scream cut through the morning air. Martha swung her rifle toward the sound. At the edge of her property, Cain's men were dragging her neighbors from their homes. The Mitchell family, elderly couple, lived there 30 years. The Browns next door to them. Even the Wilsons from the small house by the creek. "Can't hide forever, Martha," Cain's voice carried over the growing roar of flames. "Every hour you resist, your neighbors suffer. Their homes burn next." Sarah Mitchell's sobs carried clearly as a thug twisted her arm. Her husband Frank struggled against two men holding him, his face bloody from what looked like a rifle butt strike. Martha's finger tightened on her trigger, but she forced herself to hold. Too many hostages in the line of fire. One wrong shot could get innocent people killed. "Getting hard to breathe up here," Caleb whispered through the radio. He'd taken position in an old hunting blind, monitoring the gang's movements. "Smoke's pretty thick." "Stay low," Martha responded. "They're using the fire to—" A drone buzzed suddenly overhead, much closer than expected. Martha pressed against the shed wall, but the machine had already passed. Its camera swiveled, scanning methodically. More fires erupted, closer now. The gang had men moving behind the flames, using the smoke as cover. Martha counted at least 15 approaching her position, with more spreading out to flank. Through the haze, she watched Cain walk calmly among the hostages. He stopped in front of young Amy Wilson, probably no more than 12. The girl trembled as Cain placed a hand on her shoulder. "Last chance, Martha," he called out. "Surrender now, or we start making examples." The drone made another pass, lower this time. Martha could hear its motors clearly above the crackling flames. She needed to move, but the nearest cover was 30 yards of exposed ground away. "I've got eyes on the drone operator," Caleb radioed quietly. "Behind the blue pickup, near the road." Martha found the target through her scope. Young man with a control tablet, too focused on his screen. One shot would eliminate the immediate drone threat, but the noise would give away her position to the approaching gunmen. The fire had nearly reached the shed. Smoke seeped through the worn boards, making Martha's eyes water. The drone's camera focused on her location, hovering steadily. "Taking the shot," she whispered into her radio. Her rifle cracked once. The drone operator dropped, his tablet shattering on the ground. The machine above her wobbled, then spiraled into the field as its control signal died. But Cain's men had been waiting for exactly this. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, rounds punching through the shed's thin walls. Martha rolled clear as the structure splintered around her. She sprinted through the smoke, staying low. More shots followed, but the thick haze worked both ways, spoiling their aim. She could hear Cain shouting new orders, directing his men to converge on her last position. The other drones buzzed overhead, searching for movement. Martha pressed herself against an old tractor, controlling her breathing despite the smoke. The nearest group of gunmen passed within feet of her position, their boots crunching on the dry earth. "I've got movement," someone shouted. "Near the barn." The drones immediately changed course, cameras swiveling toward the large structure. Martha caught a glimpse of Caleb ducking through a side door. He'd created a deliberate distraction. "All units, converge on the barn," Cain commanded. "Box it in. She's running out of places to hide." Martha used the momentary focus on the barn to slip away from the tractor, moving toward the irrigation ditches. The smoke provided decent concealment, but she could feel the noose tightening. Cain was systematically removing her options, turning her own property against her. Another drone swept past, lower than ever. Martha froze mid-step, every muscle tense. The machine paused, its camera rotating slowly. One sudden movement would give her away. For several agonizing seconds, she remained absolutely still as the drone hovered. Then its motor pitch changed, and it moved on to continue its search pattern. Martha released her breath slowly, but she knew she couldn't stay here long. The fires were spreading, the smoke growing thicker. And somewhere in the chaos, Caleb was still out there, trying to help her defend a piece of land that should never have needed defending at all. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as Martha crouched in the irrigation ditch, sweat mixing with soot on her face. Through her scope, she watched Cain's men circling the barn like hungry wolves. They'd been probing the building for nearly an hour, convinced she was cornered inside. Martha allowed herself a small smile. The barn had always been more than just storage. It was a carefully prepared kill box. Years of military experience had taught her to have contingencies. The support beams were pre-weakened, the hayloft packed with accelerants, and the ancient wooden structure itself was a perfect tinderbox. Got at least 20 of them gathering outside now, Caleb's voice whispered through her radio from his hidden position. Cain's sending in the first team. Martha watched 4 men approach the barn's main entrance, weapons raised. They moved with professional caution. These weren't the same reckless thugs from yesterday. The gang was learning, adapting. But so was she. "Stand by," she breathed into her radio. The timing had to be perfect. More men joined the first group, forming up along the barn's weathered walls. Through her scope, Martha could see Cain directing the operation from behind a bullet-riddled truck. His left arm hung awkwardly. Someone's shot had found its mark during the night. Good. "Second team moving to the rear entrance," Caleb reported. "How many?" 6. No, 8 more. Martha adjusted her grip on the rifle. Almost 30 targets now clustered around the barn. More than half of Cain's remaining force. The rest were still occupied with the hostages, or maintaining the perimeter. The first team breached the barn's entrance, disappearing into the shadowy interior. The second team followed through the back moments later. Martha could hear their shouts as they searched the building's lower level. "Clear down here," a voice called out. "Checking the loft." Martha's finger moved to her rifle's trigger. Not yet. Wait for it. "Movement up top," someone yelled. "Got her. She's—" The explosion rocked the morning air. Martha had rigged the hayloft with improvised charges. Simple, but effective. The blast wasn't meant to kill, just to disorient and trigger the barn's collapse. Physics and gravity would do the rest. The ancient support beams, already compromised, gave way with thunderous cracks. The entire upper level pancaked down, bringing tons of wood and metal crashing onto the men below. Screams and gunfire erupted from inside as those still standing tried to escape. But Martha had planned for that too. The explosives had ignited the accelerants, turning the barn into an inferno within seconds. Thick black smoke poured from every opening. Those who made it out of the collapse now faced walls of flame. Through her scope, Martha picked off the few who managed to stumble clear of the burning structure. Clean shots, merciful compared to burning. The remaining gang members outside scattered for cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos. "Jesus," Caleb whispered through the radio. Cain was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but the psychological damage was done. They just watched their companions trapped and burning. The gang's confidence was shattered. Martha shifted her aim to Cain. He'd taken cover behind a water tank, clutching his injured arm. Even from this distance, she could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't controlling the situation anymore. He was surviving it. More explosions followed as ammunition and fuel stored in the barn cooked off in the intense heat. The remaining gang members pulled further back, abandoning their positions. Some ran for their vehicles. Martha let them go. Every man who fled reduced the odds against her. The fire had grown into a proper blaze now, sending pillars of black smoke into the Georgia sky. Martha did a quick count through her scope. At least 25 of Kane's men were either dead or badly wounded. The barn gambit had cut his force nearly in half. "Think some of them are making a run for it," Caleb reported. 3 trucks just peeled out toward the main road." "Let them go," Martha responded. "Focus on Kane. Don't lose sight of him." She began working her way through the irrigation ditches, using the smoke for cover. The gang's formation had completely broken down. Small groups huddled behind whatever cover they could find, jumping at shadows. The hunters had become the hunted. Kane was still behind the water tank, barking into a radio. His composure had cracked. She could hear the edge of panic in his voice as he tried to maintain control. The man who had swaggered onto her farm yesterday was gone. "Got more movement," Caleb said suddenly. "They're pulling back from the south side, regrouping near the trucks." Martha reached a new position, settling her rifle on a fence post. The barn was fully engulfed now, its wooden bones consumed by hungry flames. The heat was intense even from 50 yards away. Thick smoke drifted across the property, carrying the acrid smell of burning timber and worse things. Through her scope, she watched Kane's remaining men cluster around him. Their body language had changed completely, no longer aggressive and confident, but wary and defensive. Some were openly arguing, gesturing at the burning barn and their fallen companions. Kane himself looked shaken. His expensive clothes were filthy, his carefully maintained appearance ruined by smoke and dirt. The injury to his arm had left dark stains down his sleeve. He kept scanning the smoke-filled landscape, knowing Martha was out there somewhere, watching. Martha allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction as she observed the aftermath of her trap. The tide had turned. Kane's siege was collapsing, his men demoralized and frightened. Victory felt within reach. The roar of the burning barn faded to crackling embers. An eerie quiet settled over Martha's farm, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the distant pop of cooling metal. Through her scope, she watched Kane's remaining forces scatter into defensive positions, their movements panicked and uncoordinated. "They're falling back," Caleb's voice crackled through the radio. "Want me to move up for a better look?" "Negative," Martha replied. "Stay put." Something's not right. Her instincts, honed through years of combat, screamed danger. Kane's men were retreating too quickly, too deliberately. Their disorganization felt staged, theatrical. She'd seen this before. The false withdrawal, the manufactured chaos designed to draw out a hidden enemy. A burst of static cut through her radio. Then Kane's voice, smooth and controlled despite everything, filled her ears. "Quite the show, Mrs. Ellison. Impressive tactics. But did you really think I came here without a backup plan?" Martha's blood ran cold. How had he gotten their frequency? "Caleb, switch channels now," she started to say. "I'm afraid young Caleb can't do that anymore," Kane interrupted. "Would you like to say hello, son?" A muffled grunt came through the radio, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone being struck. "I'm sorry, Martha." Caleb's voice was thick with pain. "They were waiting. They knew." Martha's hands tightened on her rifle. She'd been so focused on the barn, on springing her trap, that she'd missed the bigger picture. Cain had let her succeed, knowing it would make her overconfident. "Now then," Cain continued, "let's discuss terms. You have 10 minutes to surrender. Walk out unarmed, hands raised. If you don't—" Another impact, another grunt from Caleb. "Well, I think you understand the stakes." Martha was already moving, staying low in the irrigation ditch. She needed eyes on their position. More importantly, she needed to know how many men Cain had held in reserve, the ones who'd grabbed Caleb while she was distracted by the barn assault. She reached the edge of her cornfield, using the tall stalks for cover. Through gaps in the vegetation, she caught glimpses of movement near her farmhouse. At least 6 men, maybe more, positioned around the porch. Cain stood in the center, one hand pressing a radio to his mouth, the other holding a pistol to Caleb's head. 5 minutes now, Mrs. Ellison." Cain's voice crackled. "The boy's life for yours. A fair trade, wouldn't you say?" Martha analyzed angles, distances, potential shots. But they had Caleb completely surrounded. Any attempt at a rescue would get him killed instantly. She needed a diversion, something to— The explosion caught her completely off guard. She hadn't heard the men flanking her position, hadn't noticed the charges they'd planted in the cornfield. The blast knocked her sideways, sending her rifle spinning away into the smoke-filled stalks. Heat seared her left side as burning corn husks rained down. More explosions followed, creating a wall of fire that cut off her retreat. Through the flames, shadows moved with practiced efficiency. Cain's elite team, the ones he'd kept hidden until now. They'd used her own tactics against her, letting the main force take losses while his best men maneuvered into position. Martha rolled away from gunfire, ignoring the pain that flared through her ribs. Something was broken, maybe several things. She drew her sidearm, but a burst of automatic fire knocked it from her grip. They were hurting her, pushing her toward the farmhouse. "Did you really think you were the only one with military training?" Cain's voice was closer now, no longer coming through the radio. "I have friends too, Mrs. Ellison. Friends who teach advanced tactics. Friends who know how to counter someone like you." Martha tried to stand, but her left leg buckled. Blood darkened her pants. Shrapnel from the explosion. Through the smoke, she saw more men emerging, weapons trained on her position. Professional operators, not common thugs. Their movements were precise, coordinated. "Bring her here," Cain ordered. Rough hands grabbed Martha's arms, dragging her across the yard. Pain shot through her injuries as they forced her to kneel in front of the farmhouse. Caleb struggled against the men holding him, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "I had you profiled the moment we arrived," Cain said, studying her with cold satisfaction. "Your reactions, your tactics, textbook Delta Force, the barn trap? We've trained against that scenario specifically." He gestured to one of his men. "Light it up." Martha could only watch as they tossed incendiary charges through her farmhouse windows. Flames erupted inside the home she'd lived in for decades, the place her grandparents had built with their own hands. Smoke poured from under the eaves as fire consumed generations of history. "The thing about soldiers," Cain continued, "is that they think like soldiers. Predictable, tactical. But this isn't a battlefield, Mrs. Ellison. This is business." He pressed his pistol harder against Caleb's temple. "And in business, we target what people value most." The farmhouse was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the afternoon sky. Martha's vision blurred. From smoke or tears, she wasn't sure. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd protected, was burning. The weight of failure pressed down harder than her physical wounds. Through the heat ripples, she saw Kane's men spreading out across her property, methodically securing their control. No more hiding, no more guerrilla tactics. They had won through careful planning and brutal efficiency, and she had played right into their hands. Martha slumped forward, blood dripping onto soil her family had worked for generations, the same soil that would now become her grave. Above her, the crackle of flames mixed with Kane's quiet laughter, a symphony of defeat. Darkness crept across the smoldering ruins of Martha's farm. The air hung thick with smoke and ash, turning the setting sun into a blood-red smear on the horizon. She lay where they'd left her, face pressed against dirt still warm from the day's destruction. Pain radiated through her body with each shallow breath. Her left side felt like it was on fire, ribs grinding with every movement. The shrapnel wounds in her leg had stopped bleeding, but infection was a growing concern. They hadn't bothered to tie her up. She was too injured to be a threat. Or so they thought. Kane's men had grown careless in their victory. Their patrols were sporadic, their attention divided between guarding Caleb and looting what remained of her home. Through half-closed eyes, Martha watched them pass bottles around a makeshift camp near her ruined porch. Their laughter carried across the yard, mixed with cruel jokes about the old lady sniper they'd finally beaten. As consciousness faded in and out, memories surfaced like bubbles in dark water. Her grandfather's voice, strong and clear despite the decades. "This land ain't just dirt, child. It's history. It's fight." Every acre bought with blood and courage. She remembered helping him plant corn when she was small, his calloused hands showing her how to feel the soil's readiness. "Your grandmother's people worked this ground as slaves," he'd told her. "Your daddy's folks were sharecroppers, but we own it now. Ain't nobody can take it unless we let them." The image shifted to her Delta Force training. Endless hours in mud and rain, learning to endure. Her instructor's words came back. "Pain is information. Use it. Learn from it. But never let it control you." Another memory. Her late husband, Thomas, standing in their kitchen the morning before his stroke. "You've got warrior blood," he'd said, touching the medals she kept hidden in their drawer. "It's who you are, Martha. No shame in that." A nearby explosion jolted her back to the present. One of Kane's men had tossed a grenade into her chicken coop, laughing as feathers and debris rained down. The casual cruelty made her fingers dig into the earth. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about everything that land represented. Freedom, dignity, the right to stand your ground. Through the settling dust, she caught Caleb's eye. They had him tied to a chair on the porch, bruised but alive. The boy gave an almost imperceptible nod. He was still fighting, too, in his own way. Still looking for a chance. Martha focused on her breathing, using old meditation techniques to manage the pain. She needed to stay alert, to conserve what strength she had left. Kane's professional team had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed she was finished, broken by their display of superior force and tactical skill. But they didn't understand what drove her, couldn't comprehend the generations of resistance running through her veins. She wasn't just a soldier applying learned tactics. She was the culmination of every ancestor who'd fought to keep this land, who'd refused to be driven out or beaten down. The temperature dropped as true night approached. Martha felt the change in her wounds, a deeper aching that matched the cooling earth beneath her. Kane's men had built several fires, the flames casting jumping shadows across the devastation. Their guard positions were illuminated now, a rookie mistake that told her these elite operators weren't used to prolonged field operations. A commotion erupted on the porch. Caleb had knocked his chair over, spilling one of the guards' drinks. The man cursed, hauling the boy upright with unnecessary force. Others gathered to watch, their attention drawn to the scene. "You little brat," the guard growled, raising his hand to strike. "That's enough," Kane's voice cut through the darkness. "We need him alive and relatively undamaged. For now." The brief distraction was all Martha needed. Using techniques practiced countless times in far worse conditions, she began to slowly roll toward the shadows cast by her collapsed barn. The movement sent waves of agony through her injuries, but she channeled the pain into focus, into fuel for what was coming. None of the guards noticed the subtle shifting of her position. Their fires had ruined their night vision, and the noise from their camp covered any sounds she made. Inch by inch, she worked her way into deeper darkness. The smoke provided additional cover, creating layers of concealment between her and the nearest patrol. Martha counted their positions, noted their patterns. These men were trained, yes, but they'd grown dependent on their tactical gear and superior numbers. They weren't ready for what she was about to become. When she reached the edge of the barn's shadow, Martha allowed herself one final moment of preparation. She thought of her grandfather's strength, her Delta Force training, Thomas's belief in her warrior spirit. She thought of Caleb's courage, so similar to her own at his age. All of it flowed together, transforming pain into purpose. A fuel tank exploded near the camp, Caleb's promised distraction. As men rushed to contain the fire, Martha slipped into the absolute darkness beyond their perimeter. Her injuries screamed for attention, but she moved with the silence of decades of experience. She became a ghost in the smoke, a shadow among shadows. The night air cooled her burning skin as she disappeared into the familiar contours of her land. She knew every dip, every rise, every hidden approach. While Kane's men controlled the farm's buildings, she merged with the darkness that held its secrets. Their flashlight beams cut through the smoke, searching for threats that no longer existed. They were looking for a wounded old woman, a defeated defender. But that person was gone. In her place moved something else, something born from generations of defiance and honed by years of combat. Martha melted deeper into the darkness, becoming one with it. She wasn't running, wasn't hiding. She was transforming. The hunted had become the hunter. The night deepened over Martha's farm as Darius Kane's men settled into their victory. Bonfires dotted the property, casting wild shadows across the destruction they'd caused. Empty bottles clinked as gang members passed around stolen whiskey from Martha's cellar. Their laughter echoed across the darkened fields, crude jokes mixing with boasts about their triumph. "Ain't so tough now, is she?" A heavy-set thug called Roger kicked dirt toward where Martha had been lying. His eyes widened when he saw the empty ground. "Hey! She's gone. Probably crawled off to die somewhere," another man laughed, taking another swig from his bottle. "No way she's fighting back after those hits she took." Kane's lieutenant, a man called Jackson, emerged from the farmhouse, wiping grease from his mouth. "Boss says to set up a proper perimeter. Don't get sloppy just 'cause we won." Few listened. Most were too busy celebrating, their weapons propped carelessly against chairs or left lying in the dirt. The night had turned cool, driving them closer to the fire's warmth. Their tactical formation had devolved into scattered clusters of drinking, smoking men. Near the burned-out barn, Two guards stood watch over their vehicles. The taller one lit a cigarette, cupping his hands against the breeze. "You hear something?" His partner shrugged. "Just the wind. Relax, man. That old lady's finished." The words died in his throat as a wire pulled tight around his neck. He was dragged backward into darkness before he could make a sound. The smoker reached for his gun, but a hand clamped over his mouth from behind. Something sharp pressed between his ribs, and then nothing. Both bodies were gone before anyone noticed. At the eastern edge of the property, 3 men huddled around a small fire, passing a flask. "I told you this job was cake," one said, gesturing with the bottle. "One old woman? Please." "Shut up," another hissed. "You weren't so cocky when she was picking us off earlier." "Yeah. Well, that's done now." He stopped, frowning. "Where's Mike?" They looked around. Their 4th man had been there just moments ago. The flask holder stood, squinting into the darkness. "Mike! Hey, Mike!" Silence answered. Then a soft thud behind them. They spun to find another empty spot where their friend had been sitting. Something moved in the shadows. Too fast, too precise. One man managed half a scream before a knife found his throat. The last guard fumbled with his rifle, but strong hands twisted his neck with practiced efficiency. Near the main house, Kane's men were starting to notice the quiet spreading across the farm. The laughter grew nervous, then died completely. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but smoke and shadows. "Check the perimeter!" Jackson shouted, finally sensing something wrong. "Teams of 4, stay together." But Martha was already among them, moving like a ghost through the very darkness they'd created. She used their own fires against them, striking from the shadows their flames couldn't touch. Each kill was silent, methodical, the work of someone who'd done this countless times before. A guard taking a leak behind a truck disappeared midstream. 2 men checking the chicken coop never reported back. A sniper in the water tower stopped responding to radio calls. Fear spread faster than news of the actual deaths. Men who'd been bragging hours earlier now jumped at every sound. Their weapons shook in uncertain hands. The tactical advantage of their superior numbers transformed into confusion as they couldn't tell friend from foe in the dark. "She's picking us off!" someone shouted. "We need lights! More lights!" But more lights only created deeper shadows. Martha moved between them like smoke, decades of training flowing through muscle memory. Each strike was economical, using the minimum force needed. She didn't waste energy on revenge or cruelty. This was pure tactical efficiency. Near the house, 4 men backed into a defensive circle, sweeping the darkness with their rifles. "Come on out, you old fool!" one called, fear making his voice crack. A small object rolled between them, a can from Martha's kitchen. They stared at it for a crucial second before realizing what it meant. The flashbang detonated, shattering their night vision. When their senses cleared, they were alone. Until they weren't. Martha's attack came from above, dropping from the porch roof. The first man's neck broke before the others knew she was there. She used his falling body as a shield while shooting the second and third with their own comrade's pistol. The 4th ran, only to trip over a wire she'd strung across the path. He didn't get up. Inside the farmhouse, Darius Kane stood at a window, watching his control dissolve. His remaining men were bunching up, abandoning their positions to huddle in larger groups. Raw terror had replaced their earlier arrogance. Even Jackson, his most hardened lieutenant, was showing cracks in his professional facade. "Spread out now!" Kane shouted through his radio. "Find her! She's just one person!" but his words rang hollow. They'd all seen her capability earlier. Now she was unleashed, moving with nothing left to lose. The darkness itself seemed to be hunting them. A burst of gunfire erupted near the silos. Wild, panicked shooting at shadows. Screams followed, then silence. Kane's radio crackled with desperate voices calling for help, for direction, for extraction. Positions he'd thought secure went dark, one by one. She was doing more than just killing his men. She was systematically destroying their confidence, their cohesion, their will to fight. Every death added to the fear. Every silence bred paranoia. Through his thermal optics, Kane watched another team go dark near the tree line. His hands tightened on his rifle as the realization hit. He wasn't leading an operation anymore. He was trapped in a hunting ground, and Martha Ellison was the apex predator. The pre-dawn sky hung heavy with smoke and tension. Bodies lay scattered across Martha's property, testament to her night of methodical elimination. Only 12 of Kane's men remained, huddled near the farmhouse in tight groups, their earlier bravado replaced by raw fear. Jackson, Kane's lieutenant, struggled to maintain order. "Keep your eyes open! She's still out there!" His voice cracked, betraying his own terror. Behind an overturned tractor, 3 gang members pressed themselves against the metal, weapons trained on the surrounding darkness. The oldest one, Pete, wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the cool morning air. "This is insane. How many of us did she get?" "Shut up!" his companion whispered harshly. "Just shut!" A soft thud interrupted him. They turned to find their third man missing. "Tommy?" Pete called softly, then froze as warm droplets hit his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Tommy's body draped across the tractor's exposed undercarriage, blood dripping steadily. Before either could scream, Martha struck. She dropped between them, combat knife flashing. Both men fell without raising their weapons. She moved like liquid shadow, every motion precise and practiced. Years of Delta Force training had carved these movements into her muscles, and now they flowed without conscious thought. Near the barn's burning remains, 4 men formed a defensive circle around Caleb. The teenager sat bound and bruised but alive, his eyes scanning constantly for any sign of Martha. His captors jumped at every sound, their nerves frayed by hours of watching their companions disappear. "Stay sharp!" their leader barked, overcompensating for his fear with volume. "She'll come for the kid. That's when we got her." Caleb allowed himself a small smile. They still didn't understand. They thought Martha would make mistakes out of emotion, rush in recklessly to save him. They didn't realize that emotion made her more dangerous, not less. A sudden burst of automatic fire erupted from the silo area, followed by screaming. The guards turned toward the noise instinctively. That quarter-second of distraction was all Martha needed. She emerged from the pre-dawn mist like an avenging spirit. The first guard's knee exploded as her bullet found its mark. As he fell, she was already moving, using his descending body as a shield, while she shot the second man through the shoulder. The third guard managed to squeeze off 2 wild shots before Martha's elbow crushed his windpipe. The fourth man held his pistol to Caleb's head. "Stop! I'll kill him!" Martha went still, gun trained on the man's chest. Her eyes, cold and focused, locked onto his trembling hands. "Drop the weapon!" he shouted. "Now!" Caleb felt the man's fear in the way the gun barrel shook against his temple. Without warning, he threw his head backward, connecting with the man's nose. The gun went off harmlessly into the air. Martha's shot took him in the chest before he could recover. She cut Caleb's bonds with quick, efficient movements. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," he assured her, rubbing his wrists. But Kane's got something planned. He was talking about some kind of backup. Martha nodded grimly. "Stay close. We're ending this." They moved through the property like ghosts, Martha leading with her rifle ready. More gunfire erupted near the house. Kane's remaining men shooting at shadows, their discipline completely broken. Jackson's voice carried across the farm. "Form up! Everyone to the house!" His attempt at command was met with chaos as the surviving gang members broke cover, running frantically toward the building. Martha used their panic against them. 2 more fell before reaching safety, her shots precise, despite the dim light. The survivors scrambled inside, barricading the doors and windows. 5 left, Martha whispered to Caleb as they took cover behind a storage shed, including Kane and Jackson. Inside the house, Kane paced frantically, his designer clothes stained with dirt and blood. "Where's our backup?" "Call them again!" Jackson pressed his radio repeatedly. "Nothing. Signal's dead." "How?" Kane grabbed the radio, shaking it uselessly. "We had a clear signal all night." A small smile touched Martha's lips as she watched through her scope. The signal jammer she'd activated hours ago was still doing its job. Kane's reinforcements wouldn't be riding to the rescue. The sky began lightening, false dawn painting everything in gray shadows. Martha moved them closer to the house, using years of intimate knowledge of her property. Every creaky board, every loose stone, she knew them all. A shot rang out from an upstairs window, the bullet sparking off a metal post near her head. Martha pushed Caleb down, returning fire in one fluid motion. Glass shattered, and a body tumbled from the second floor. "4," she whispered. Kane's voice carried through a broken window, edge of hysteria clearly audible. "Jackson, get the charges set." Martha's eyes narrowed. She hadn't anticipated explosives. "Caleb, back up. Get to the tree line." "But now." Her tone left no room for argument. As Caleb retreated, Martha circled the house. Through gaps in the hastily barricaded windows, she caught glimpses of movement. Kane's men setting demolition charges. They planned to bring down her home with everyone inside. A sudden burst of gunfire forced her back. Jackson had set up a crossfire from the kitchen door, pinning her behind a stack of firewood. She heard running footsteps, Kane making a break for one of the remaining vehicles. Martha squared her shoulders, decades of training crystallizing into this moment. Kane had brought war to her home, threatened her land, hurt people under her protection. Now, as dawn approached, she would show him the true cost of that mistake. She moved like flowing water, every motion exact and lethal. 2 quick shots eliminated Jackson's cover fire. Kane's panicked figure stumbled toward an SUV, blood streaming from a wound in his side. Behind him, his last 2 men provided covering fire, but their shots went wild in the growing light. Martha advanced steadily, unstoppable as the coming dawn. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke-filled sky, casting long shadows across Martha's war-torn land. Darius Kane stumbled toward his SUV, leaving a trail of blood from his wounded side. His designer suit, once pristine, now hung in tatters. His usual smooth confidence had crumbled into raw desperation. Martha advanced with measured steps, her rifle trained steadily. Each movement was precise, calculated, the walk of a predator who knew their prey was cornered. Behind her, flames still licked at what remained of her barn, and bodies of Kane's men lay scattered across her property. "Stop right there," Martha commanded, her voice carrying clear and cold across the morning air. Kane froze, one hand pressed against his bleeding wound, the other raised in surrender. He turned slowly, trying to summon back his businessman's charm. "Mrs. Ellison, let's be reasonable here." Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes darting between Martha and the vehicle just yards away. "On your knees." Martha moved closer, keeping perfect firing distance. "You don't understand what you're doing," Kane said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I have connections. Powerful people who'll make your life hell if you—" "Knees. Now!" Each word carried the weight of absolute authority. Kane's legs buckled, whether from fear or blood loss was unclear. He knelt in the dirt, amid the shell casings and debris from the night's battle. "I can make you rich," he tried again. "The aquifer under this land, we could split it. 60-40 in your favor." Martha's expression didn't change. "You burned my crops. I'll pay for everything. Triple its value. You threatened my neighbors. They'll be compensated. Everyone wins." Kane's words came faster now, stumbling over each other. "I have judges in my pocket, police chiefs on speed dial. You can't touch me without consequences." The morning breeze carried the scent of gunpowder and burning wood. In the distance, Caleb watched from his safe position at the tree line, witnessing justice unfold. "You hurt that boy," Martha said quietly. Kane's face twisted into something ugly. "That little bastard? He should have stayed out of it. This is business, you stupid." Martha took another step forward. "You came to my land with guns and threats. You thought I was just an old woman you could bully." Her voice remained level, but carried steel beneath it. "You thought wrong. Listen to me very carefully," Kane snarled, his mask of civility finally dropping completely. "If you kill me, you'll never know peace again. I have people everywhere. They'll come for you, come for that kid, burn everything you—" The crack of Martha's rifle cut through his threats like a knife. Kane jerked backward, eyes wide with shock. A small, neat hole appeared in the center of his forehead. For a moment, he remained upright on his knees, as if his body hadn't registered what happened. Then he toppled sideways into the dirt. Martha maintained her aim for several seconds, ensuring the threat was truly ended. Years of training had taught her to never assume. But Kane lay motionless, his eyes staring sightlessly at the brightening sky. The morning suddenly seemed very quiet. The crackling of distant flames and the soft whisper of wind through the damaged crops were the only sounds remaining. No more gunfire, no more threats, no more engines or screaming or breaking glass. Martha lowered her rifle slowly, decades of combat discipline evident in every movement. She scanned the battlefield that had once been her peaceful farm, noting the damage, categorizing what would need to be rebuilt first. The house still stood, though its windows were shattered and its walls scarred by bullets. The barn would need to be completely replaced. The eastern field was scorched, but the irrigation system had prevented the fire from spreading too far. Bodies lay scattered across her property, a testament to what happened when violence visited the wrong farm. Most had died quickly, cleanly. They had come expecting an easy victory over a helpless target. Instead, they'd found a Delta Force sniper who had spent decades burying her skills, praying she'd never need them again. The rising sun painted everything in shades of gold and red, nature's colors mixing with the aftermath of human conflict. Martha stood motionless, feeling the weight of the night's events settling around her. She had protected her land, her legacy, but the cost would need to be reckoned with. In the growing light, she could see vultures already beginning to circle high overhead. Nature's cleanup crew, arriving right on schedule. They would have their work cut out for them today. Caleb emerged from his position at the tree line, approaching carefully. His young face showed concern, not for their safety now, but for her. "Martha," he called softly. She turned to look at him, her expression softening slightly. The boy had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal. He had refused to break under pressure, had maintained his composure even as a hostage. She saw something of herself in him, that same core of steel beneath a quiet exterior. The morning breeze picked up, carrying away some of the smoke that still hung in the air. It brought with it the familiar smells of her farm, earth and growing things, life continuing despite the violence that had visited overnight. Cain's body lay crumpled in the dirt, his expensive clothes soiled with blood and soil. All his connections, all his power, all his threats had meant nothing in the end. He had chosen the wrong target, brought war to the wrong farm, and paid the ultimate price for his mistake. Silence settled fully over the land, broken only by the distant call of morning birds beginning their day, untroubled by the human drama that had played out beneath their skies. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh light over Martha's battlefield. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as local authorities finally responded to reports of gunfire and explosions. Martha stood her ground as patrol cars and ambulances poured onto her property, red and blue lights flashing against the smoke-stained sky. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn, shouting commands until they saw Martha, calm, composed, her rifle pointed safely downward. Caleb stepped forward, hands raised, explaining rapidly how Cain's gang had attacked first, how they'd tried to steal the land through violence and intimidation. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to put down the weapon," a young deputy called out, his voice uncertain as he surveyed the bodies scattered across the property. Martha carefully placed her rifle on the ground. "Check their vehicles," she said quietly. "You'll find what you need to know." The sheriff arrived minutes later, a weathered man named Davidson who'd known Martha for years. He took one look at the scene and holstered his weapon. "Mrs. Ellison, why don't you tell me what happened here?" As Martha explained, officers began searching the gang members' vehicles. They found laptops filled with evidence, fraudulent property documents, blackmail material on local officials, detailed plans for seizing land through force. One deputy discovered a hidden compartment packed with cash and drugs. "Chief," a detective called out, holding up Cain's phone. "Got text messages here about bribing Judge Harrison and Police Chief Miller over in Riverside County. This goes deep." Davidson's face darkened. "Looks like Mr. Cain's operation just got blown wide open." He turned to Martha. "Clear case of self-defense, far as I can see. These men came armed, with criminal intent, threatened your life and property. Forensics teams arrived, documenting everything. News vans began appearing at the edge of the property, reporters hungry for the story. Martha watched it all with detached calm, her military training evident in her composed demeanor. By mid-morning, neighbors started showing up. They brought food, water, and helping hands. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the road hugged Martha tight, whispering, "We heard the shooting all night. We should have come sooner." "No," Martha said firmly. "You stayed safe. That's what mattered." More community members arrived throughout the day. Farmer Jim brought his tractor to help clear debris. The local hardware store owner showed up with a truck full of lumber and supplies, refusing payment. "This farm's been here longer than any of us," he said. "Can't let thugs destroy our history." Caleb worked tirelessly alongside the volunteers, his young face determined as he helped cart away broken glass and splintered wood. Martha watched him organize a group of teenagers to salvage what they could from the barn. "He's got a good heart," Davidson said, standing beside her. "Brave kid, staying to help during all this." Martha nodded. "He understands what this land means. Not just property, it's legacy, history." The sheriff studied her for a moment. "You know, there's been rumors about you for years. Folks wondered why someone who could afford better chose to work this farm alone." He gestured at the precision shots that had dropped Kane's men. "Guess now we know. The past is the past," Martha said quietly. "I chose peace. And when peace wasn't an option, you chose survival." Davidson shook his head admiringly. "Don't worry about any legal troubles. Between Kane's evidence and 30 witnesses who'll testify to his gang's harassment of local farmers, no prosecutor would touch this case." Throughout the day, the community's support transformed from cleanup to rebuilding. Carpenters arrived to repair windows and doors. A roofing crew started patching bullet holes. Women from the local church set up a food station to feed the workers. Martha moved among them, directing efforts, accepting help with quiet gratitude. She showed Caleb how to mend fences, how to check the irrigation systems for damage, how to tell which crops might survive and which would need replanting. "I'd like to keep helping," he told her, as they examined a scorched section of field. "Not just today. I want to learn everything about this place." Martha studied him thoughtfully. The boy had proved himself, not just brave, but steady, responsible. "Land like this," she said finally, "needs people who understand its worth. Who'll protect it?" Caleb's face lit up with pride. "I will. I promise." As the sun began to set, the day's work wound down. The farm was far from fully restored, but the transformation was remarkable. Windows glowed with new glass. The porch stood rebuilt and solid, and the community's presence had driven away the lingering shadows of violence. Martha sat in her favorite chair on the repaired porch, her rifle propped carefully beside her. Not hidden away this time. There was no more need for secrets. The weapon was simply part of her story now, like the land itself, a tool of protection, not aggression. Caleb brought her a glass of sweet tea, then settled on the porch steps. Together they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The evening breeze carried the scent of freshly cut lumber and the promise of healing. Where Kane's men had tried to destroy, the community had rebuilt stronger. Where they'd meant to isolate her, they'd instead forged stronger bonds between neighbors. The land had endured, as it always had, and would continue to do so under watchful eyes and caring hands. Martha's grip relaxed on her glass as she looked out over her property. The crops would grow back, the barn would be rebuilt, and her family's legacy would continue, protected not just by her strength, but by the strength of a community that had finally shown its true colors. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.